What if the first words carved by human hands weren't really for us, but for whoever would come after we're gone? Imagine this. Somewhere under the Iraqi desert, pressed into ancient clay, there's a warning we've missed for 100 years, just sitting there while we dig and dust and catalog. Between the old bricks of ruined cities and the tents of archaeologists, something waits. Not gold, not glory. A message left behind by people who saw time differently than we do. People who pressed their thoughts into mud, hoping someone like us would find it much, much later. Before we go any deeper into what those hands tried to save, just take a second. If you're the kind who gets pulled in by stories that won't stay buried, hit like, maybe subscribe. If you're still up, listening as night creeps in, drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from, what time it is. I like to picture this mystery drifting across time zones, following people into their dreams. This story doesn't start with a big discovery. It starts with a question that's bothered archaeologists ever since they started digging up the Sumerian tablets. Back in 1849, when Austin Henry Layard was poking around Nineveh, he figured he'd find the usual stuff: records, king lists, inventories of grain. Instead, he pulled out something that made no sense. A chronicle of rulers who supposedly reigned before a great flood, their lifespan stretching way beyond anything possible. The writing was dry like a receipt or a ledger. No poetry, no flair, just facts. It's called the Sumerian King List, and right at the top, it hits you with a line that still messes with historians. After kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. Not invented, not fought for, not earned. Descended. Like rulership itself floated above the earth until it was handed down to the first city. The list just keeps going in that same deadpan style. 8 kings reigning before the flood. And their reigns, not decades, not centuries, tens of thousands of years. Alulim I rules for 28,800 years. Alaugr gets 36,000. Enmen-Luana clocks in at 43,200. Then the whole thing shifts with a single line, then the flood swept over. After that, everything changes. The reigns shrink fast. Suddenly, kings last hundreds of years, then decades, then the kind of lifespans we actually recognize. The era of the Anunnaki gives way to the era of people. The impossible slips into history. The mythic dissolves into what we think of as normal. But the list itself doesn't flinch. It keeps the same tone, the same format, like it's all just bookkeeping, whether it's gods or men. For over 100 years, scholars have tried to make sense of those wild numbers. They chalk it up to metaphor, scribal mistakes, maybe some kind of code. But none of those theories really land, especially after researchers at the University of Pennsylvania decided to cross-check the king list with other cuneiform tablets in their archives. Turns out, the numbers aren't just random scribbles. They form patterns, mathematical ones, astronomical ones. Patterns that make it seem like someone was trying to lock in information that went way beyond just keeping track of years. In 2019, deep in the Penn Museum archives, a team led by Dr. Sarah Klein fired up modern computational tools on tablets that hadn't seen daylight in almost a century. What they found was unsettling. The reign lengths before the flood weren't just neat multiples of 3,600, the Sumerian SAR. They matched up with real astronomical cycles, long cycles, the kind you can't figure out in a single lifetime. The kind that need generations, maybe whole civilizations, to track. Whoever came up with these numbers understood deep time in a way that still escapes us. But here, where things get even weirder, when Dr. Klein's team lined up those ancient cycles with today's astronomical data, they found matches that no one saw coming. The cycles in the king list accurately predicted celestial events, Venus conjunctions, planetary alignments, solar rhythms, that wouldn't happen for thousands of years after the tablets were made. It's almost like the Sumerians, or whoever taught them, left behind a calendar, not just for their own time, but for ours and the future. Picture yourself in that archive. The lights overhead buzz, soft and steady. Outside, Philadelphia traffic slides through rain, but in here, everything feels untouched by time. You're holding a clay prism about the size of a wine bottle. All over its surface, wedge-shaped marks, made by a reed stylus more than 4,000 years ago, catch the light. The clay is cool, a little rough. Look close enough and you'll spot them. Fingerprints pressed deep into the wet earth by a scribe who lived and died long before anyone even dreamed of electricity. Those ridges and whorls belonged to someone who thought they were saving something vital, not inventing, just preserving. Dr. Klein's team kept circling one question: why would the Sumerians hide predictions about the sky in their creation stories? Unless these weren't just stories. Unless they were building a warning system, a calendar that would last even if their words and cities vanished. Even if nobody remembered what the numbers meant, the data would wait, ready for someone clever enough to crack it. Then a surprise. In 2021, researchers at the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute started digging into old translations from Nippur, an ancient Sumerian city. Most of the tablets were pretty dull, receipts, inventory lists, that sort of thing. But tucked among them, they found a handful of texts that had sat untranslated since the 1930s. These were battered, written in an older Sumerian than most people could even read. Dr. James Morrison spent weeks piecing together the fragments, and finally, out came a set of instructions. At the top, in the careful hand of some ancient scribe, a title: "For those who come after the silent years." The instructions laid out how to keep the sky markers, which stars to watch, when to watch them, how to track the wandering lights, the planets. It explained how to press these observations into clay so they'd survive fire and flood. And most striking of all, it told why. The Anunnaki decreed that humanity must remember the turnings, so that when the cycle completes, those who remain will know the hour of return. That phrase, the hour of return, showed up 17 times across the damaged tablets. Always the same context, always tied to watching the sky, always about keeping this knowledge alive through the silent years. These were times when, apparently, the teachers stopped speaking, when humanity had to carry the burden alone. Morrison sat on those translations for a while before sharing them. He knew what was coming. Academics don't love anything that smells like ancient astronauts or gods from the sky, but the tablets were real. Chicago unearthed them from sealed layers at Nippur a century ago. Their Sumerian was genuine, not some modern fake. And the message was pretty blunt. Someone taught the Sumerians to watch the heavens, and someone made sure they knew why. Once Morrison's translation appeared in the Journal of Near Eastern Studies at the end of 2021, the reaction was instant and honestly kind of chaotic. Half of the scholars shrugged it off, saying the hour of return was just poetic talk about seasons or farming. The other half couldn't ignore the details, though. These tablets didn't talk about crops or festivals. They mapped out planets, star positions, and math for predicting sky events centuries ahead. And they made it clear these observations were a duty, sacred, something that had to go on even when everything else fell apart. The tradition mattered because missing it meant missing the return. The return of what? The tablets never say straight out. They talk about those who descended, the great Anunnaki, the measurers of time. There's a departure and a promise to come back. All of it wrapped up in watching the sky, not for curiosity, but as a warning. A warning system for what, exactly? Maybe the real answer isn't in the tablets' words, but in what they just can't stop recording. Out of all the cuneiform documents dug up from Mesopotamia, a weirdly huge number are about the stars. Star charts, planetary sightings, eclipse forecasts, endless lists of omens tied to what's happening in the sky. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, they were sky-obsessed, way more than you'd expect from people whose main business was farming. Sure, farmers need calendars. It makes sense to track the seasons, but the depths they reached with astronomy, it's way past what you'd need to plant barley. Take the Venus tablet of Amisajuka, sitting in the British Museum. It logs Venus's movements with day-by-day accuracy for 21 years straight. That's not just glancing up every now and then. That takes a dedicated group. Watching the planet every single night, writing it all down, catching its disappearances and returns for 2 decades. Why go to that extreme? What crop ever needed Venus tracked to that kind of detail? Maybe farming wasn't the point. Maybe these records served a whole other purpose. The tablets drop hints but never spell it out, probably because by the time most scribes were copying these things, even they'd forgotten the original reason. They just knew it mattered. Their ancestors insisted it did. The Anunnaki, the big gods who supposedly handed civilization to humanity, set up these skywatching routines. And everyone knew if you stopped, something bad could happen. Jump to 2018. A Yale team starts using new imaging tech to read tablets too busted up for regular translation. They find a fragment from Ashurbanipal's library in Nineveh, dating back to the 7th century BCE, but the scribe copied it from something much older. There's a note in the margin, copied from a tablet written before the cities were built, in the time when the Anunnaki walked among us. Before the cities, that line floored the researchers. By the 7th century BCE, cities had been around for over 2,000 years. So what did before the cities were built even mean to that scribe? What era were they talking about? The bit of tablet held a bunch of astronomical calculations. It focused on the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, the rare moment when the two planets look like they merge in the night sky. This happens about every 20 years, but the tablet's math went way beyond a single event. It mapped these conjunctions over centuries, showing how the meeting point drifts through the zodiac, looping back about every 800 years. Here, what really shook the Yale researchers, the numbers were dead on, not close for the ancient world. We're talking precision down to a tiny fraction of a degree, the kind of detail you get today with telescopes and computers. No way a document supposedly older than cities should pull off that accuracy. Dr. Eckhart Fromm, the lead on the project, double-checked everything. He brought in astronomers. He ran the ancient math through today's orbital calculations. Every time, the old numbers matched the modern results. Whoever made those records understood celestial mechanics at a level that just shouldn't have been possible without advanced tools. And according to the scribe, those calculations came from the time when the Anunnaki walked among us. The Anunnaki's name is everywhere in Mesopotamian literature. Later, people called them gods of the underworld, the great judges, cosmic lawmakers. But in the earliest Sumerian stories, before myths got tangled up, they show up as something else. Teachers, organizers, beings who came down from the sky and set up civilization. They taught farming, irrigation, metalwork, writing, math, astronomy, medicine, law. Then the records say they left. The withdrawal didn't happen all at once. It crept in, slow and steady. The tablets talk about this distance growing bit by bit. People stopped talking directly. The faces that used to be everywhere faded out, then disappeared for good. What was left? Instructions, protocols, stuff you had to remember. And above all, those star charts and skywatching routines. The texts hammer this home. Keep watching the heavens. That's how you'll know when the Anunnaki come back. For over 100 years, scholars have written these stories off as myths. The usual line is that ancient people made up gods because they couldn't quite believe humans were capable of real progress. But maybe we've had it backwards. Maybe the Sumerians weren't inventing gods to explain their knowledge. Maybe they were just trying to write down, as clearly as they could, who taught them everything. Over time, those teachers became legends. Legends turned into gods, and memories shifted into worship. Now picture this. What if there was already a pretty advanced civilization hanging around before Sumer showed up? Something from the end of the last ice age, when the world looked totally different, sea levels way lower, dry land where there's ocean now, people packed along coastlines long since lost under the Persian Gulf or the Mediterranean. Maybe those folks knew their way around astronomy, math, architecture, and farming. They had the time, thousands of years to figure things out in a stable world. Then everything changed. The ice age ended, and not gently. It was chaos, glacial lakes bursting, floods bigger than anything we've ever seen, oceans rising over 400 feet. Whole coastlines vanished. People had lived there forever, and suddenly all of it was gone. Archaeology doesn't leave much room for doubt. Between 12,000 and 10,000 BCE, the planet turned upside down. When things calmed down, those coastal civilizations had disappeared, swallowed by the sea. But some people made it out. They ran inland, grabbing what they could, seeds, tools, and most important of all, what they remembered. They carried memories of a world before the flood, memories of cities that nobody would ever see again, memories of their teachers, the elders and scientists who had spent their lives watching the sky. And when these survivors finally found a safe spot and started putting things back together, they did something vital. They wrote it all down. As soon as they figured out writing, they pressed those old stories, the ones their grandparents had told, into clay. Tales from before the flood. Stories about the Anunnaki, who walked among their ancestors and taught them how to measure the world. This way of looking at things makes sense of so much weirdness. Why does Sumerian civilization show up already complete with no ramp-up? Because it wasn't really developing from scratch. It was remembering, piecing together scraps of knowledge from a world that got wiped out. That's why their math, astronomy, and medicine seemed so advanced right from the start. They weren't coming up with new ideas. They were salvaging what was left. Those bizarre, impossibly long reigns on the king list, maybe they aren't about how long a single person lived. Maybe they track how long a line of knowledge keepers held onto their traditions before the flood broke everything. And Sumerian, why doesn't it have any relatives? Easy. The sister languages drowned with the rest of the coastal people. Sumerian only survived because the group who spoke it lived far enough inland to dodge the worst of the disaster. And then there's the obsession with the stars. If you've survived a civilization-ending event, and you're convinced that the sky controls what happens down here, you don't stop watching. Maybe your elders taught you that the cycles of stars and planets are the key to surviving future disasters. So you keep the tradition alive. You track every movement in the sky because those patterns might warn you about floods, droughts, or worse. You hold on to that knowledge, pass it down, because forgetting is too dangerous. Forget, and the next catastrophe catches you off guard. The texts pretty much spell it out. Again and again, Sumerian and later Babylonian astronomers didn't just jot down where the planets were or when an eclipse would happen. They tried to predict what would happen on Earth. Jupiter lines up with Saturn, expect floods. Venus vanishes for a while, droughts coming. Sure, to us that sounds like superstition, astrology, not science. But what if it wasn't just superstition? What if they noticed real patterns? What if the cosmos actually nudges our climate, and we're only now catching on? Modern climate science has started to unravel some of this. We know the sun's 11-year cycle shifts the weather. Even longer solar cycles move ocean currents around. Some cycles, centuries or even millennia long, seem to line up with big changes. The Little Ice Age, the medieval warm period, the climate sweet spot that let the first cities thrive. These things don't just happen out of nowhere. There are patterns, running longer than any one person can remember, but not so long the planet forgets. Imagine an ancient civilization tracking these patterns for thousands of years. They'd end up with some serious data connecting what happens in the sky to what happens on the ground. They'd know that certain planetary alignments or solar events came before big disasters. That kind of knowledge, priceless. You want to save it however you could, even if it meant hiding it in myths, religious stories, or king lists, things future generations might not really get but would copy down anyway. So maybe that's what these tablets are, a warning system, not a fantasy. A way to keep tabs on cosmic cycles so people could brace themselves for the bad times. A legacy from people who understood the universe runs in loops, and sometimes those loops bring trouble. The Anunnaki in this light aren't gods. They're the keepers of knowledge, astronomers, mathematicians and scribes from a world lost to flood. When they saw disaster coming, they acted. They saved what they could, taught survivors, and set up rules so the skywatching would continue. They knew someday the cycle would come around again. And if people kept watching, if the knowledge survived, maybe next time we'd be ready. So when people talk about the hour of return, it's not about gods flying down in spaceships. It's the return of the cosmic setup that brings disaster, the lineup of planets before the flood, the solar pattern that flips the climate. the warning signs in the sky. If this reading is right, then the real question is whether the Anunnaki existed. The question is whether their warning holds up. Are we sliding toward another cycle? Are the same old signs starting to show up? And if they are we paying attention? Back in 2020, astronomers noticed something odd. Jupiter and Saturn lined up closer than they had in nearly 400 years. Everyone called it the Christmas star, a gorgeous sight, nothing more. But a few scholars who knew the old texts felt uneasy. Babylonian tablets say certain Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions mark big transitions, shifts from one era to the next. And this one, right at the winter solstice, matched old descriptions of the turning of the great year. Probably nothing, right? Just a coincidence. That's what reason says. But in those cool, quiet archives, where ancient tablets sit behind glass, fingerprints pressed into clay 4,000 years ago, doubt hangs in the air. Because these texts don't just list the stars, they tell what happens next, and what they describe feels a little too familiar. Rising waters swallow cities. Floods drive people out. Climate chaos, crops failing, whole populations on the move. One age ends, another one starts. The old texts don't paint this as punishment or some random disaster. They say it's just the cycle, something bigger than us, rolling on whether humanity pays attention or not. The only way to survive, know what's coming, watch the skis, stay ready. Keep the warning systems alive, so when the cycle turns again, the people left behind can spot the signs and act before it's too late. Maybe that's why the Sumerians built their ziggurats. Those giant stepped pyramids aren't just temples, they're observatories. They stand tall over the flat Mesopotamian plains, giving a clear view all around. From up there, you can track the sun, the moon, the planets, the stars. Watch their movements with real precision. The ziggurats are tools, instruments, set up to keep the careful observations the Anunnaki once said were essential. And that's probably why people kept rebuilding them, generation after generation, even as empires collapsed, languages shifted, and new gods took the stage. Underneath all the rituals and the myths, there's this stubborn thread running through, a job that never ends. A scientific purpose passed down from teachers who made it clear, don't ever stop this work. Watch the sky, write down what you see. If you forget, you're left exposed. And if you're exposed, sooner or later, disaster finds you. The ziggurat of Ur is still there, partly restored, rising out of the desert like a memory in stone. Climb those ancient steps, stand where priests once watched the stars, and you'll see why they picked this spot. The horizon stretches flat forever. The sky feels huge, wide open, and the stars are sharp, especially in the dry desert air. It's obvious this wasn't about pleasing gods. It was about watching patiently for generations, tracking the heavens and recording their patterns. So when those patterns came around again, people would recognize the signs. Now here, where it gets really interesting. Back in the 1920s, archaeologist Leonard Woolley dug below the ziggurat of Ur and found something that didn't seem to have anything to do with astronomy at first. Deep down, under all the layers of rebuilding, he hit a thick layer of clean, undisturbed silt, over 8 feet of it. Flood debris. Above the silt, a new city. Below, an older one crushed and buried. Woolley thought he'd found evidence of Noah's flood. Scholars later told him not quite. It was a massive regional flood, not a worldwide one, still devastating if you lived there. But the real point isn't about the scale. The Sumerians never said the flood wiped out the globe. They said it destroyed their world, and the evidence backs them up. Around 2900 BCE, a catastrophic flood buried southern Mesopotamia under mud and water. The flood in those ancient stories wasn't just a myth. It was a memory. So right there, beneath the ziggurat, the observatory, the warning station, Woolley found proof the disaster actually happened. The warning systems weren't superstition. They were a learned response. The Sumerians watched the sky because experience, or something passed down from those who survived, taught them that cosmic patterns could mean real trouble on Earth. The flood drilled that lesson in deep, or maybe their ancestors did, passing it down. Either way, they built their whole civilization on a promise: never get caught off guard again. That changes the way you read every Mesopotamian story after that. Take the Epic of Gilgamesh. The hero searches for immortality and instead finds Utnapishtim, the flood survivor who tells him how the gods sent destruction but gave him a warning, letting some people survive. That's not just a myth, it's a record, a testimony about how knowing what's coming, even just a little, can save lives when disaster strikes. Look at the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation story. The gods set the universe in order, separate heaven and earth, fix the stars in their paths, measure out time. Sounds like a myth, right? But what if it's more like a manual? A memory of teachers laying out how the cosmos works, setting up rules for watching the sky, organizing knowledge so people could track the big cycles and be ready when the next one hit. All those omen texts, thousands of clay tablets, each one tracking stars and planets and what they supposedly meant for life on Earth. They look like crude astrology at first glance. But what if they're not? What if they're actually data logs? Imagine generations of astronomers obsessively jotting down patterns, noticing that when the sky looked a certain way, the weather followed a certain rhythm. They kept at it, even as the real reasons behind those patterns faded from memory. If you look at Mesopotamian literature like this, it stops being just old myth or religious rambling. It turns into an archive. This was a civilization hell-bent on holding onto what mattered, encoding knowledge in every form they could: religious, scientific, poetic, mathematical. They wanted that core information to survive, even if the deeper meaning was lost, because it mattered, because forgetting meant risk. The old teachers, the Anunnaki, hammered home the point: keep tracking the skis, keep the records. It wasn't just tradition, it was about survival. If that's the case, those tablets aren't just dusty relics. They're still working in a way, still holding on to the data they were meant to protect, still counting the years, tracking the cycles, waiting for someone clever enough to crack the code and catch the warning inside. Dr. Klein and her team at Penn took this idea and ran with it. They built their own computational models and started crunching the ancient numbers, not just looking backward but projecting forward. If those crazy long reigns in the king list were really about celestial cycles, and if those cycles pointed to events on Earth, then the patterns should still hold. They mapped out Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, Venus loops, the solar cycles hidden in those old Sumerian SAR units. Then they pushed the math into the future. And what they found made everyone freeze. The tablets with their careful cycles the Anunnaki, whoever they really were, thought were worth preserving for millennia, are pointing to a convergence. It's not happening tomorrow, but it's coming soon. In a few decades, 3 different astronomical cycles, each on their own schedule, are set to line up. The last time this happened, around 12,000 years ago. That was the end of the Ice Age, the big climate upheaval, when sea levels jumped, coastlines disappeared, and any civilizations around back then probably didn't make it. Dr. Klein hasn't published any of this. The paper just sits there, saved on her computer, quietly circulating among a handful of colleagues. The implications make people uneasy. If these patterns are real, if the ancients actually understood how cosmic cycles can mess with Earth's climate, then those tablets aren't just museum pieces. They're working alarms, still live, still flashing a signal, still trying to get our attention. But warnings don't help if nobody's listening. Down in the archives of the Oriental Institute in Chicago, where Dr. Morrison first puzzled over the sky markers tablets, one detail keeps nagging at him. The texts go further than just celestial observations. They explain how to keep the records alive during the silent years. Those are the times when teaching stops, when each generation has to protect the knowledge on its own, even if they've forgotten why it matters. These old texts, they knew we'd forget. They counted on it honestly. So they packed in redundancy, repeating themselves, leaving clues because they figured people down the line would lose all context. We'd keep the records without understanding the point. To help, they dropped in markers, celestial events, things you can't miss, meant to jolt even a forgetful civilization into realizing something big is happening. Take the winter solstice of 2020 when Jupiter and Saturn lined up. That was one of those markers. The texts even spell it out. When those two wandering lights come together in the sign of the goat, when the longest night hosts the brightest meeting, that's the first checkpoint. That's when humanity's supposed to wake up, remember why watching the sky matters. But nobody did. Sure, people snapped photos, posted them online, and astronomers got excited for a night. But no one saw it as a warning. Nobody linked it to old protocols. We just forgot. We've slid so deep into these silent years that even when the signals show up, we don't know what we're looking at. Unless, maybe, a few researchers, buried in university libraries, piecing together cuneiform fragments, translating texts that have gathered dust for decades, manage to crack the code in time. Maybe they can turn ancient warnings into plain modern speech. Maybe they can convince us that what looks like myth is actually knowledge, handed down by survivors we've turned into gods. The Anunnaki, not aliens from the stars, but people who survived disaster, who came down from the high ground after the floodwaters dropped. They found scattered humans trying to start over, and they taught them farming, building, writing, math, astronomy, and most of all, the importance of watching the sky, because the sky had decided their fate once and would again. That's the warning staring us in the face, and we've missed it for more than a century. It's not a message from gods or visitors from space. It's a legacy from desperate, brilliant people who watched their world unravel. They did what they could. They saved what mattered, set up protocols, baked in redundancy, hid warnings everywhere, in numbers, in myths, in buildings, in the stars. And they made the survivors promise, keep watching. Don't let the knowledge die. Be ready when the patterns come back. Because the cycles do come back. Cosmic rhythms don't care about us. They run on their own schedules, whether we're paying attention or not. But if we keep up the observations, if the knowledge survives, if we can break the code in time, maybe, just maybe, when the cycle comes around again, we'll see it. We'll know what's coming. We'll have a shot at preparing, at surviving. That might be what those tablets really hold. Not prophecy, not magic, just data. Data about cosmic cycles and their effects on Earth, copied and recopied by generations who barely remembered why, but still believed it mattered. They built ziggurats, trained astronomer priests, tracked every planet because someone had told them, don't stop. This work is essential. Now tucked away in modern archives with big computers and new tools, researchers are finally starting to figure out what the data says. They're piecing together the patterns, testing predictions, finding out that the ancient astronomers weren't just making things up. They were tracking real cycles, things that match climate shifts, cycles just long enough to slip from human memory, but short enough that, if you keep good records, you can catch them. In 2022, a small team at Penn Museum decided to put it to the test. They took the cycles written into the Sumerian tablets, lined them up with climate data from ice cores, tree rings, sediment. They asked, straight up, do these cycles match? When the tablets say the climate should shift, does the Earth's record show it actually did? The first results landed with barely a ripple, just a technical paper in a journal most people have never heard of. It was careful, full of caveats, but at its heart the message was pretty simple. The connections were there. When Sumerian astronomers marked a turning point in the sky, the climate data showed the Earth flipping too. Not a perfect match, sure, but way more than random chance. Statistically, it mattered. Someone, thousands of years ago, was tracking something real. Nobody really noticed. Archaeoastronomy isn't exactly mainstream. The findings were just too weird to fit into any neat scientific box. Climate scientists weren't squinting at cuneiform. Assyriologists weren't poring over ice cores. The work drifted in this strange space between disciplines, visible to a handful of specialists, invisible to everyone else. Still in the back rooms and digital archives, the work kept going. People kept translating, calculating, testing, following the threads, and gradually the picture shifted. The Sumerian system, not primitive at all, it was brilliant, tracking cycles that played out over years, decades, centuries, even millennia. They wrapped up all this math so it could survive the rise and fall of empires, embedding it in sacred duties because, honestly, that was the only way to keep it alive when everything else collapsed. The tablets were more than records, they were survival kits, built to outlast disaster and forgetfulness, meant to preserve core truths even if nobody remembered why they mattered. They were supposed to spark recognition when the same patterns returned, so when someone, far in the future, finally cracked the code, they'd see the warning their ancestors left behind. So what if we're the ones? What if we're finally able to read the warning? What if all our data, our computers, our climate models, what if these are the tools that finally let us see what's been right there for 4,000 years? And if we are, then what exactly are the tablets trying to say? They describe a cycle, a huge one rolling on for thousands of years. Most of the time, things are good. Stable climate, growing cities, knowledge building on knowledge. But every so often the cycle flips, not slowly, suddenly. Within a couple generations, everything shifts. Fields go dry, rivers flood, weather turns wild and unpredictable. The old patterns that civilization depends on just vanish. These wild spells don't last forever. They're like pulses, decades, maybe a century or two, then things settle out. But while they last, societies that count on stability get hammered. Crops fail, trade falls apart, cities empty, people move, sometimes violently. And as institutions break down, knowledge disappears. That's the story the tablets tell. No gods punishing anyone, no moral failing, just the way the cosmos works whether we notice or not. And they're blunt about it. Knowledge is the only defense. Spot the transition when it starts. Remember, it'll end. Hold on to what matters through the chaos, so when things settle, you can rebuild instead of starting over from nothing. The Sumerians thought they were already rebuilding. That's why their texts talk about restoration, not invention. They saw themselves as piecing together what was lost in the last crash. They held tight to their astronomical rules because those rules had helped at least some people survive the last upheaval. They believed passing them down was the only shot at weathering the next one. Now the computational models from the Penn Museum team, if the patterns hold, say we're coming up on another turning point. Not an apocalypse, just a shift. A stretch of rough weather, unstable climate, the kind of thing that stresses farms, scrambles weather, and forces people to adapt or fall apart. Nobody can nail down the exact timing. These cycles are a mess, overlapping, tangled, playing out under the influence of variables the old astronomers didn't even know existed, let alone measure. Still, the big picture stands out. Several long, slow cycles are lining up again. Last time this happened, around 12,000 years ago, the world flipped on its head. Ice sheets collapsed. Oceans swallowed the coasts. Weather patterns swung wild. The old tablets say civilizations crumbled. This time we've got a fighting chance. Technology, for one. We can talk instantly across the globe. We actually understand how climate works. We track melting ice, rising seas, greenhouse gases. We can run the numbers, see scenarios play out before they happen. We can adapt if we're paying attention. That's the catch. We have to see what's really happening. Climate chaos isn't just random misery. Sometimes it's the logical result of cycles our ancestors tried, desperately, to warn us about. The tablets take on a new urgency. They're not just artifacts, they're tools. Still working, still packed with data that matters for us. They wait, hopping for a generation smart enough to crack the code and wise enough to listen. Picture those quiet, early hours before dawn. Deep in the archives, behind glass, the old clay tablets lie still, fingerprints of scribes pressed into mud thousands of years ago, warnings written by hands long gone. Researchers keep going, translating, calculating, connecting the dots. Piece by piece, they're building the image the Anunnaki, or whoever they really were, tried so hard to save. This wasn't about glory or worship or ego. It was about knowledge, pure, practical, hard-won knowledge about the cycles of the cosmos and what they do to life down here. They scattered it everywhere, math for the number people, Myths for the storytellers, stone monuments for the builders, star charts for the skywatchers. Redundant, layered, overlapping, so if one version vanished, another might survive. And all of it points to one blunt message. The world runs in cycles, and sometimes those cycles turn dangerous. The only shield is knowledge. Watch, prepare. Keep the warning systems alive so when the pattern returns, we spot it and act before things go sideways. Maybe that's the Anunnaki's real legacy. Not some lost tech we'll never figure out. Not magic, just something better, a warning system. A way to keep track of cosmic time that outlasts kingdoms, languages, even memory itself. Something that waits in the dark, patient, until a new generation finally sees it for what it is. We could be that generation. Right now, we stand on the edge of understanding what our ancestors fought to preserve. The computer models run day and night. The patterns get tested again and again. The cycles written into clay are projected into our own future. What comes out is both sobering and exciting. Sobering because we're not new at this. We're not the first smart civilization, not the first to face a changing climate, not the first to think we're special. We're just the latest turn of the wheel. Our ancestors watched their world change. They survived. They left us a map. They taught the next in line. They set up the warnings, hoping we'd use them. And yet there's hope because they pulled it off. The knowledge made it. The warning system survived disaster, empire collapse, lost languages, floods, wars, and centuries of forgetting. It's right here, pressed into clay, written in numbers, waiting in the archives for anyone who's willing to dig in and pay attention. The Anunnaki teachers, astronomers, the original data keepers, won their fight against oblivion. They beat time. Their message got through. We're reading it. We're finally starting to understand. Now the question is, are we smart enough to listen? Will we recognize that what looks like superstition might be survival know-how? Will we trust that maybe our ancestors understood things we're only just rediscovering? Will we keep watching the skis, updating the warnings, and get ready for the next big turn? So do we just shrug it all off as old myths and random chants? Do we chalk it up to ancient people inventing gods to explain what they couldn't understand and move on, certain we've outgrown all that? Maybe we keep marching forward, sure of our grasp on the world, until one day the cosmic cycles finish their slow spin and the conditions we've always counted on start to shift right under us. The tablets don't ask you to believe in anything. They just sit there preserving information, star charts, climate notes, the math behind the patterns. This data doesn't care how anyone interprets it. It's there and you can test it. Run the numbers. See if it holds up or falls apart under modern science. That's happening now, but quietly, buried in specialist journals and university libraries. Researchers are digging through ancient astronomical systems, checking if those old records actually hold useful clues about cosmic cycles and climate shifts. So far, the connections look stronger than you'd expect by accident. The patterns stretch over centuries. Turns out, the ancient astronomers really were tracking something real. There's still a lot to figure out. The patterns need to be compared against bigger data sets. We need to understand how they work, tighten up the predictions. But there's a real chance these Sumerian tablets, and the protocols they hide, carry warnings that matter for us now. The Anunnaki, whoever they were, seem to have locked away knowledge that could help us spot and prepare for shifts in climate that move too slowly for any one person to notice, but fast enough to shake whole civilizations. Maybe the hour of return isn't about gods coming down from the sky. Maybe it's about cosmic conditions cycling back around. The point where the world's steady climate tips into something new, putting all our careful systems, farming, society, the works, under stress. If the old astronomers got it right, and if their cycles match up with real-world climate data, then we're heading toward another turning point. Not tomorrow, not in a sudden disaster, but soon enough that it matters if we see it coming. That's the moment when awareness lets us adapt, when hanging on to old knowledge keeps us from losing everything and having to start all over again. That's the warning. That's what the tablets are saying. The Anunnaki, or whatever you want to call those ancient teachers, thought this was so important that they wrote it in every way they could, over and over, just in case memory failed and only the data survived, waiting for someone in the future to finally crack the code. Maybe that's us. Computers keep crunching the numbers, scholars keep translating, the patterns keep getting tested, and slowly the picture comes into focus. Our ancestors weren't just spinning stories. They were collecting knowledge, hard-won, carefully tracked and desperately preserved, about how the world really works and which signs mean trouble is on the way. Even now, the desert wind sweeps across the ruins of Uruk and Ur, carrying bits of ancient brick through the air. Listen close, and it's not voices you hear, but a kind of stubborn resolve. People who saw disaster coming, who managed to survive, who saved what mattered most, and who built warning systems to last longer than they did. They reached across thousands of years to try and warn us. That warning made it, pressed into clay, hidden in numbers, copied by scribes who didn't always know why they kept the chain going. The tablets survived. The data stayed put. The warning system worked just like they planned. Now it's on us to finish the job, decode it, test it, and actually take seriously the idea that ancient knowledge might still matter today. Because the cycles are turning again, this is the moment when it matters more to prepare than to scoff. The Anunnaki left exactly what they meant to, a warning, not a call for worship or proof of magic, but a practical, testable alert buried in astronomy and math. It was built to outlast whole civilizations, because data doesn't fade the way memories do. The cycles keep moving. The patterns are coming back into view. The only real question left is whether we'll spot them in time, or if we'll repeat the lesson our ancestors learned the hard way. You can't ignore cosmic cycles just because you don't believe in them. They keep turning, and if you're not ready, they don't wait. In the quiet corners of archives where tablets rest and researchers work late into the night, a different kind of archaeology is taking shape, not just digging up lost cities, but unearthing lost knowledge. It's an excavation of information, pressed into clay, carried through centuries, waiting for us to finally understand. What archaeology keeps uncovering isn't a story of primitive people fumbling in the dark. It's a story of survivors, people who were tough, clever, and determined. They understood something we sometimes forget. Knowledge is the one thing that can weather disaster as long as you take care to protect it. So they did. They made it redundant. They stored it in every format they could invent. They drilled it into their kids, even when the kids couldn't see the point. And it worked. The knowledge made it through. The warning got to us, carried across centuries on clay and stone. Now it's our move. Outside, the desert wind keeps blowing. In the museum, ancient tablets rest quietly in their glass cases. If you look close, you can still see the fingerprints. Real people pressed their warnings into wet clay, certain these messages were worth saving forever. They weren't wrong. The warnings matter. The cycles they tracked are still rolling along. If we're paying attention, if we're open to the idea that our ancestors might have understood something real, something we're only just beginning to notice ourselves, then maybe, when the next transition hits, we won't be caught off guard. Not because some god showed up and told us, because humans, after surviving disaster, fought to keep the truth alive. They wrote warnings in clay, in numbers, in stone. They built backup after backup, knowing civilizations collapse, but information, when you protect it right, lasts. The Anunnaki left a warning that nobody ever really cracked. Not until now. Not until researchers started using computers, climate data, astronomy, throwing everything at these old protocols to see if there's real info inside. Not until we were sharp enough to spot that sometimes what looks like myth is actually data hiding in plain sight. Not until the cycles started lining up again, the pattern coming back into focus, and suddenly, what sounded like superstition starts looking a lot more like preparation. That hour of return people talked about, it's not when gods come back. It's when the sky and the earth line up just right and climate swings out of balance. And all the signs, the tablets, the cycles, the new models built from ancient numbers, they're all saying the same thing: it's coming. Not tomorrow, not next year maybe, but soon enough that it matters if we're paying attention. Soon enough that ignoring the warning could turn a disaster into something worse. Those tablets have been sitting there waiting. The warning has been right in front of us. The data's always been there. We're just now figuring out how to read it. The real test, whether we actually do something with this knowledge, whether we treat the warning as real, whether we brace ourselves for the change the cycles are pointing toward. Or if, like so many before us, we shrug it off, laugh at the old stories, and only realize much too late that cycles don't care how sure we feel. They turn with or without us. And they don't care who's watching or if anyone's ready. The Anunnaki got it. They watched a cycle end. They survived. They left the warning. They made sure the knowledge lived on. That was their part. Now it's on us to listen to what the clay been whispering all this time, to crack the code they left behind, to admit we're not the first to face upheaval and definitely won't be the last, but maybe, just maybe, we'll be the first to meet it head-on with knowledge still in hand, because our ancestors refused to let it die. The desert wind blows dust that was once temples, once cities, once the hands that pressed warnings into clay. Those warnings survived. They're still here, still active, still waiting for us to pay attention. The hour of return is closing in. The cycles are turning. The warning couldn't be clearer. The real question is, are we listening? But if we want to really get the message, we've got to look closer at these tablets. Not just what's written, but how it's written. Because the way the message is delivered, that matters too. Clay doesn't fake it, it remembers. In the labs at the British Museum, experts work with tools you can barely see microns across. Under the microscope, the tablet's surface looks like the moon. Conservators study every groove, every angle, every gritty detail. They spot things the first translators missed, simply because those early readers saw words, not instruments. They saw texts, not technology. But what if these tablets are both at once? Back in 2017, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a conservator, was working with a tablet from the Yale Babylonian collection. She expected the usual, another astronomical record, just one of thousands tracking the planets. But as she looked closer, something weird jumped out at her. Under magnification, she noticed some cuneiform signs were pressed way deeper into the clay than others. And not just here and there, it looked systematic. Same signs, repeated all through the text, marked with more force. At first, she figured it was just sloppy handwriting. Maybe the ancient scribes had heavy hands, or maybe they just weren't consistent. People aren't machines after all. But the deeper she looked, no pun intended, the less random it seemed. Those heavy impressions always showed up on the same words: Venus, Jupiter, alignment, return, warning. Every single time, the scribe had pressed harder on purpose. It was like they were underlining, but using the only tool they had, their stylus. That got her curious, so she started checking other astronomical tablets. Same thing, different places, different times, different scribes, but always the same pattern. Certain words, always the important ones, stood out, pressed deeper into the clay. This wasn't just variation, it was a code, a backup plan. Even if future readers couldn't make sense of the language, the physical marks would still shout, "This is important." It says a lot about how these ancient astronomers saw their work. They weren't just jotting down notes. They were making time capsules, hoping their warnings and discoveries would outlast their own civilization, even their own language. Even if cuneiform faded, the pressure marks would still be there, quietly telling anyone who bothered to look, "Pay attention here." So what were they trying to highlight? Always the same set of ideas. Alignments in the sky, cycles that repeat, warnings about what those patterns might mean down on Earth. Over 1,000 years, in cities spread out across Mesopotamia, Different scribes chose, again and again, to press harder on those same concepts. Nobody organized this. There wasn't some central authority telling everyone, hey, press harder when you write warning. But the tradition survived, passed down from teacher to student. If you write return, make it deep. If you write warning, don't let it fade. Make sure these words survive even if nothing else does. That kind of tradition only comes from knowing things fall apart. Civilizations collapse, languages get lost, but clay, once it's baked, sticks around. So the truly vital stuff wasn't just written, it was carved in quite literally. Depth became meaning, pressure meant priority. Dr. Morrison wrote up her findings in a conservation journal in 2019. Not many people noticed. Conservation journals aren't exactly must-reads for Assyriologists or astronomers, but a few researchers, people trying to figure out what these tablets really meant, not just what they literally said, paid attention. Because if scribes were encoding information physically as well as linguistically, what else was hiding in those tablets? Pretty soon, a team at the University of Chicago jumped in with 3D scanning tech. They didn't care about translating the text. They wanted to map the surface, every ridge, every groove, every wedge. They turned thousands of tablets into digital point clouds, mathematical models of the clay's surface, then started hunting for patterns. What they found was wild. The tablets weren't just old documents. They were ancient data storage devices, information stacked in layers. Sure, there was the text, but there was also the depth of the impressions, the spacing, the tilt of the wedges, tiny details nobody would notice by eye, but computers could pick up right away. Some tablets, especially the ones about astronomy and predictions, had what they started calling depth encoding. The more important the info, the deeper it was pressed. If the scribe wasn't sure, the impression was shallow. Their level of confidence was right there in the clay. So, a tablet might describe a planetary event in words, but the depth of those marks would tell you how certain the prediction was, how much evidence backed it up, how much you should trust what's written. This completely changed how people read these tablets. They weren't just dusty old records anymore. They were complex data sets, full of layers and meaning. When the team in Chicago started digging into the depth-encoded information on these astronomical tablets and matched it up with what the text actually said, they realized just how advanced those ancient observation methods really were. These scribes weren't just jotting down what they saw. They were actually keeping track of how sure they felt about it, their doubts, the strength of the patterns they noticed. In a way, they were doing statistics, Bayesian analysis, believe it or not, except their probability was pressed into the clay because they didn't have any other way to show confidence. So you'd get a line like, Venus will appear in the eastern sky in month IV, day 15. But then the depth of the impression would let you know how much faith the scribe had in that prediction. Maybe it meant, a not so sure only saw this once or twice. Or maybe, very confident spotted this pattern again and again, this one's solid. The clay itself held extra information the words alone couldn't capture. This clears up a mystery that's bothered researchers for ages. Why were these ancient astronomers so obsessed with record keeping? Why fill up thousands of tablets with every planetary position, every phase of the moon, every rising star? It always seemed a little over the top. But if they were building statistical models, if they were actually trying to measure how reliable their predictions were, the sheer volume makes sense. You need a mountain of data to tease out real patterns from random noise. And the depth encoding proves they got this. They understood that not all observations were created equal. Some were more trustworthy, some less so. They built that knowledge right into the tablets, turning them into more than just data. They became records of data quality too. When the Chicago team ran modern statistical tests on the depth-encoded info, trying to see if the ancient confidence levels lined up with actual predictive success, they found the scribes had a pretty good handle on their own accuracy. Deep impressions, high confidence, usually nailed it. Shallow impressions, low confidence, often missed the mark. these astronomers knew their own limits. They could tell when they were sure and when they were just guessing, and they marked that self-awareness into the very structure of their records. This kind of scientific thinking, testing ideas, understanding uncertainty, thinking statistically, isn't supposed to show up in ancient astronomy. We're used to seeing it after the scientific revolution, not thousands of years before. Yet here it is, baked into Mesopotamian clay from 2000 BCE and even earlier. So where did this come from? Who taught them to work this way? The tablets themselves give a clue. The oldest astronomical texts, the ones that go back further than the rest, keep repeating a line in their colophons, those little notes at the end that say who copied the tablet and from where. The line goes, copied from a tablet from before the flood from the house of Enki, which the Anunnaki established. The house of Enki. In Sumerian myth, Enki is the god of wisdom and sweet water, the keeper of the me, the divine rules for civilization. His temple in Eridu was supposed to hold all knowledge, and these colophons claim the astronomical methods came from there, from tablets that survived the flood, from knowledge set down by the Anunnaki. You could read this as myth, gods, floods, divine wisdom, or maybe it's just a scribe's honest attempt to show where the information came from. They never said they invented it. They said they copied it from something older, from before the flood, from teachers called the Anunnaki. If you take the scribes at face value, if you treat their notes as genuine attempts at provenance, not just fancy stories, then the astronomical techniques go back before the flood. Knowledge that made it through disaster, kept alive by some group or tradition that never let it die out. The depth encoding actually backs this up. The technique looks inherited, not newly invented. The oldest tablets that use depth encoding don't show any signs of people fumbling or experimenting. The scribes already know what they're doing, as if they learned from someone else, as if this way of working was already a tradition. The story goes that this tradition started way before the flood, back when the Anunnaki supposedly walked the earth, setting out the rules civilization had to follow. Maybe we need to actually take that idea seriously for once, not as proof of God's meddling in human affairs, but as real historical documentation. Think about it. Scribes copying from sources they believed were ancient, even older than their own cities. They credited these sources to teachers, the Anunnaki, and stuck to the techniques those teachers laid out. They developed ways to encode information physically, pressing details deep into clay so their records would outlast even their languages. These tablets aren't just mythology, they're proof of something bigger, knowledge surviving disaster. Survivors sticking to observation protocols because they'd learned those rules mattered. Scribes copying tablets with care, not just repeating words but preserving the whole system. The patterns, the metadata, the actual way the information was embedded in the clay. These weren't just stories. They were tools, instruments. Now in the quiet rooms where these tablets sit, conservators and researchers are mapping every detail, turning ancient clay into digital data. And what's coming into focus isn't a bunch of primitive people inventing gods. It's a community of sharp-eyed observers keeping scientific traditions alive for centuries. They tracked what they saw, encoded how confident they were, and saved their methods. All of this wasn't about pleasing the gods. It was about warning future generations. Their warning wasn't about sin or punishment. It was about cosmic cycles and climate shifts. The ancients understood the world runs in patterns, and sometimes those patterns turn dangerous. They knew the only way to survive was to keep watching, keep recording, so that when those hostile times came around again, people would be ready. That's what the depth encoding is all about. The old astronomers knew they were building warning systems. They realized the future might forget their language, miss the point of their math, or dismiss their conclusions. But if they packed the message deep into the clay, literally as well as figuratively, maybe it would last. Maybe one day someone would figure out what mattered by analyzing the very pressure and depth of the wedge marks. Now here we are. With our 3D scanners and fancy software, We can finally read what those tablets have been holding for 4,000 years, not just the text, but the physical signatures, the pressure of the stylus, the deliberate depth of each mark, all of it designed to speak across millennia. And what we're finding, it's honestly a little overwhelming. The ancient astronomers were onto something real. The cycles they tracked line up with actual climate patterns. The confidence ratings they pressed into the clay, they check out when we compare them with paleoclimate data. Their warning system worked. Through all the chaos of rising and falling empires, the information survived. It's still working. The tablets still carry their warnings. The depth patterns still highlight the big ideas: alignment, return, warning, cycle. And the astronomical patterns they described are still playing out, still heading for those moments the tablets point to, moments of transition. Dr. Morrison, the conservator who first noticed the depth encoding, has spent years scanning every astronomical tablet she can find. She's been building a huge database, tracking which ideas got extra emphasis across different regions and centuries. The pattern holds up. From the oldest Sumerian tablets to the latest Babylonian ones, the same concepts keep coming up, marked the same way. Warning, return, cycle, alignment, watch the sky. Those were the essential messages, pressed deep into clay built to last. It's like the scribes knew they were sending a message meant to outlive them all, their civilization, their language, everything. Redundancy everywhere: language, math, architecture, myth, and as we're only now figuring out, the clay itself. Clay doesn't forget. If anything, it holds on tight to urgency, not the frenzy of panic or fear, but that clear, stubborn sense people get when they know knowledge is the line between making it and disappearing. You can feel it in the way they worked, like they'd seen what happens when memory fades, when warnings go ignored, when a whole culture stumbles into the unknown with its eyes closed. So they doubled down, triple even. They carved astronomical records into stone, pressed them into clay, built them into the angles of buildings. They wove them into stories, taught them in schools, handed them to temple astronomers. Same knowledge, dressed up every way they could think of, scattered everywhere, just to make sure that even if disaster gutted one system, something would survive somewhere. This is what survivors do. People who know what it feels like to lose everything. They get that civilizations crumble, libraries burn, whole ways of life vanish. But when you spread the core knowledge far enough, in enough shapes, pieces cling on. And with luck, with patience, those pieces can be pieced back together. That's what we're doing now. Pulling the fragments together: Babylon's tablets, the depth marks conservators found, the models researchers run, the clues in old architecture, the hints buried in myths. Each one a scrap of the same ancient warning system. They waited, tucked away in every corner, for someone who could see the bigger picture and stitch it back together. The Anunnaki, whoever they really were, figured this out ages ago. No single weak spot. They spread the message. If the star charts vanished, the buildings still pointed the way. If war or fire crushed the clay, the old stories kept the thread alive. If no one remembered the rituals, the very depth of the marks in the tablets still whispered the warning. It's smart. It's almost shockingly forward-thinking. It flips the way we picture ancient people. We like to imagine them scrambling just to get through the day, never planning for a world that might outlive them. But Mesopotamian record-keeping, that was long-game thinking. They planned for collapse. They built systems to survive chaos. But why? Why pour so much into protecting this knowledge? Because of what it meant. These cycles in the stars, etched into tablets, tracked for centuries. They weren't just about planets moving across the sky. They tied into shifting climates, into the deep rhythms that reset the world. The clay, the math, the buildings, all pointed to another big change coming. Not tomorrow, not next year, but soon enough that we can still do something about it. That's the moment when a warning makes a difference. When you can still prepare, still adapt, still keep disaster from turning into extinction. That's why the scribes pressed warning, return, and cycle so deeply into the clay. They weren't just copying old habits. They understood They were passing down knowledge about patterns that come back around, cosmic cycles that change the world. They knew someone someday would need to spot the signs, keep watch, and be ready when the wheel turned again. They did their part. Through wars, lost empires, forgotten languages, they kept the records going. They copied, they taught, they hid clues in plain sight. They made sure the warnings lasted longer than any kingdom. And the warning's still here, pressed into clay, checked and rechecked by modern science, mirrored in ancient climate shifts, proven by the very detail and care they put in so long ago. Now it's on us, our time. We're the ones who can read the clay, run the tests, talk to each other across the planet. We're the audience those old astronomers were hoping for. Maybe we're the first who can actually understand what the Anunnaki tried so hard to preserve. The real question is, are we actually listening? Are we willing to believe that ancient wisdom could matter now? Do we get ready for the shifts the old cycles warn about, or just wave them off as myths, just stories from people who saw patterns where there were none? The tablets don't ask for faith, they just keep records, and records aren't sacred, they're testable. That's what's happening right now. Scientists in labs and universities across the US and Europe are digging into these predictions. They're lining up ancient astronomical cycles with modern climate models, checking if what those old observers noticed really does line up with real-world changes. They're crunching the numbers, looking for any sign these warnings point to something concrete. What they're finding is interesting enough that research is ramping up. The National Science Foundation is handing out grants for projects that blend archaeoastronomy and paleoclimatology. Over in Europe, the Research Council is funding work on ancient astronomical methods and how they might apply today. The debate is shifting, less about whether these old observations mean anything, and more about what they're actually telling us and what we should do about it. That shift says a lot. It means people are finally open to the idea that our ancestors weren't clueless. Maybe their systems of knowledge were more than just superstition. Maybe the rituals and protocols they stuck to for thousands of years actually came from a real understanding of the cosmos and how it affects life here. It's pretty humbling. Maybe we're not the first advanced civilization. Maybe human progress isn't just one smooth climb from darkness to light. Knowledge gets lost, then found again. Civilizations rise, fall, and rise again. Every generation has to relearn things the last one figured out. Those old Mesopotamian tablets, they tell this story in their own way. They claim to hold knowledge from before the flood, a time when people knew more, when teachers set up rules that stuck around even when no one remembered why. They don't see civilization as a first step, but as a recovery, picking up the pieces after the world turned upside down. If that's right, then we're the latest in a long cycle. Another civilization rising from the ashes. Another group piecing together scraps of ancient knowledge, trying to make sense of it again. And here we are, facing that same old question. Are we smart enough to learn from those who came before, or are we just going to repeat the same mistakes and lose it all again? The tablets hint that this cycle has played out more than once. Civilizations rise and fall over and over, in sync with cosmic cycles that outlast any one society but still happen often enough to leave a mark. Climate swings put pressure on farming, societies collapse, knowledge scatters, and then slowly it all starts up again. Each time, people rebuild using whatever survived. Astronomical notes saved by a handful. Building tricks passed down by workers who don't know where they came from. Math copied by scribes who don't understand the meaning. Myths that hold onto the shape of the story, even when the details are gone. Bit by bit over generations, we put the pieces back together. Our understanding grows. Civilization rebuilds. And if we're careful, if we spread knowledge around, build in backup plans, keep good records, then maybe when the next crisis hits, we'll lose less. Maybe we'll hang on to a little more each time. And maybe, just maybe, some civilization will finally spot the pattern, catch the warning, and break out of the loop, not by accident, but because they prepared. We could be that civilization. For the first time, we can talk to the whole planet at once. We can store information in ways that don't rot or fade. We can run climate models, predict what's coming, and actually get ready. We can fix our infrastructure, tweak how we grow food, and work together across borders. But only if we pay attention. Only if we take the warning seriously. Only if we're willing to admit those ancient astronomers might have known something we're only now starting to figure out. Depth encoding makes humility possible. It's proof. Those ancient astronomers weren't just gazing at the stars, they were doing real science. They ran the numbers, checked their confidence, and worked with methods that honestly seem way too advanced for something written in 2000 BCE. The clay tablets back this up. These weren't superstitious storytellers. They were careful observers following protocols. Scientists. Teachers, really, struggling to keep their knowledge alive, hoping it would outlast whatever disaster they saw coming. And they pulled it off. Their knowledge made it through. The warnings survived. Somehow the data reached us. Now it's on us to figure out what to do with it. In the archives, where the tablets wait and conservators keep scanning and decoding, you can feel a quiet urgency growing. Not fear, not chaos, just a steady pressure. People know time matters. If the warnings are right, if the cycles are real, then we've got a window to get ready. We can update our systems, shore up infrastructure, brace for climate shifts before they hit. But that window's not staying open forever. Cycles roll on, whether we notice or not. The skis don't wait for our debates. If we're still arguing about whether to take the warning seriously when the changes start, we'll be caught off guard, just like those before us. Like every civilization that ignored the signs, convinced themselves the universe cared about their doubts, and learned too late it doesn't. The Anunnaki left a warning. The tablets held onto it. Depth encoding made sure it lasted. The sky's cycles keep ticking just as they mapped them. The link to climate, still there, still holding up under scrutiny. The warning system worked. Now it's just a question of whether we're actually listening. Will we be the ones who finally break the cycle? Will we respect the effort of those ancient teachers and take their warnings seriously enough to get ready for what's coming? Or do we wind up as just another story, a civilization that knew but didn't act, one more round of forgetting and loss? It's our call. The information's there. The warnings are clear. The patterns are coming together. That moment they warned about, it's closing in. Those ancient astronomers saw this coming. They planned for it. They hid warnings in every format they could dream up. Redundancy, backup, distribution, systems built to outlast time, hoping their message would reach the people who needed it most. We're those people. Now the question is simple. Are we wise enough to hear it? The desert wind still blows across the Iraqi plains, carrying bits of old brick, particles of clay that once held careful lines of cuneiform. Dust made from memories, scribes who knew what it meant to watch their world fall and still fight to save what mattered. They did it, their knowledge survived. Now it's on us, our fight, our responsibility. The tablets are still here, still carrying the warnings, still holding in their depth the same message. Watch, observe, recognize the signs, get ready for the cycle. The Anunnaki, the teachers, the keepers, whoever they really were, they kept their promise. They saved the knowledge. They kept the warning system alive. They made sure the message would last long enough to find us. Now we have to keep our promise. To them, to ourselves, to whoever comes after us, whoever will depend on whether we're smart enough to prepare. The warning's right there. The cycles are turning. Now's the time to listen. But listening isn't just nodding along. It means understanding what was saved and why it mattered so much they guarded it for thousands of years. Those tablets aren't just records of the stars. They're a worldview. They hold a way of seeing ourselves in the vast sweep of time, a survival blueprint that knows we're fragile, but also that knowledge can make us resilient. In 2023, researchers at the Penn Museum found something that shines a light on this mindset. While cataloging fragments from a damaged archive, they came across pieces of what looked like a teaching text, an instruction manual for apprentice astronomers. The fragments were a mess, and it took months of careful work. But when Dr. Klein's team finally pieced together enough to read, they found a letter, a message from a master to a student pressed into clay, meant to guide, meant to last. And somehow, all these centuries later, it does. The letter starts off stiff and formal, full of titles and honorifics, but it doesn't stay that way. Pretty quickly, the master astronomer drops the ceremony and speaks straight from the heart. He's trying to explain why this work matters so much, why his student needs to keep at it, even when the task feels pointless, when night after night, the sky offers nothing new and all that effort seems to go nowhere. Why it's still worth it, even when entire generations go by and no one finds an obvious use for all the data piling up. You wonder why we keep watching the sky, even though the seasons change whether we do or not, the master writes. You ask why we bother tracking cycles that outlast any single lifetime. Listen, we don't do this for ourselves. We do it for the people who will come after us. We're the bridge. The generations before us watched and wrote, and now we have what they left behind. We add our own notes to theirs, and then we pass it forward. Someday, long after anyone remembers our names, someone will read what we wrote. They'll need what we saved. Because we kept going, because we refused to break the chain, they'll understand what they're up against. They'll be ready in ways we were. That's our job, not for ourselves, but for a future we'll never see. After that, the letter gets more technical, methods, protocols, all the details. But that first message hangs over everything else. The old astronomers saw themselves as links in a chain. They took in the wisdom passed down to them and sent it forward into an unknown future. They weren't doing all this for quick results. They were playing the long game, gathering enough information that, one day, someone could spot patterns that would never show up in a single lifetime. That's why they kept such obsessive records. Stacks of clay tablets marking where planets had been, year after year, century after century. That's why they guarded their methods so carefully, why they embedded information deep in the records, so even if the language died out, the core details would survive. They weren't just making notes for themselves. They were building a foundation that would only become useful after hundreds or even thousands of years of steady watching. They were betting on a future they'd never see, trusting that someone, someday, would need what they'd left behind, and would be sharp enough to figure it out. Turns out they were right to trust. We're the ones they were hopping to reach. Now we're the ones who can read those old encodings, rebuild the patterns they tracked, test their hunches about the climate. For the first time, we can look at the whole sweep of the data they spent millennia collecting. A single observation didn't mean much on its own, but put them all together, and suddenly they mean everything. This is what the Anunnaki, the original teachers, must have known. Knowledge builds over time. If you want to spot real patterns, you need data that stretches further than any one person can remember. If you want a civilization to last, you need to protect and pass down what you've learned generation after generation. They set up the systems. They trained the first astronomers. They made sure the work would keep going. And they built in enough backup that, even if people forgot why they were doing it, even if everything else fell apart, the work kept happening anyway. That's what good institutions do. When they're designed right, they keep running whether anyone remembers the original reason or not. Scribes copied tablets because that's what scribes did. Astronomers watched the sky because that's what astronomers did. The routines became rituals, and rituals survived even when their meaning faded. The notes kept coming. The records piled up. The knowledge stuck around. And now, here we are. A generation with computers powerful enough to finally make sense of it all. We can see patterns that span thousands of years. We can check if the old methods were tracking something real. We can dig into not just the words, but the physical marks, the hidden signals, the notes about how much confidence the astronomers had in each observation. And what do we find? It's all real. The observations hold up. The methods are sharp. The confidence checks work. The climate patterns they spotted, those are real too. These ancient astronomers were doing actual science. They built real warning systems. They saved real knowledge about cosmic cycles and how they mess with life on Earth. Knowing this should change how we look at ancient knowledge. We shouldn't write it off, thinking ancient people couldn't possibly have known what they were recording. We should step back and realize, when generations guard and pass down what they've learned, sometimes they manage to save truths that we've only just begun to understand again. This goes way beyond just astronomy. If the Mesopotamians managed to hold onto real, working knowledge about cosmic cycles, you have to wonder, what else did they keep safe? What other kinds of instructions or warnings are tucked away in tablets we've written off as pure myth? How much are we missing in the lines we haven't even learned to read yet? Now, researchers are starting to dig into these questions. They're looking at old medical tablets, paying extra attention to how information might be hidden in the way things are written or carved. They're studying agricultural texts for patterns, clues that might show these people had a surprisingly sharp grasp of crop cycles and changing climates. Even stories we've always called myths are getting a second look, maybe as records of real events, told in the only language those cultures had before science came along. The line between myth and memory is getting blurry. When tablets describe ancient floods and geologists find evidence that matches, you start to rethink things. When star charts predict eclipses thousands of years out, or when you spot mathematical tricks hidden deep in the writing, you have to ask, at what point do we stop calling it mythology and start calling it witness testimony? And maybe that's the real warning hidden in all these old records. Not just about cosmic cycles or climate swings, but about how easily knowledge slips away. About how civilizations can lose their grip on understanding, even as they keep copying and preserving information they don't get anymore, just because the ancestors said it mattered. Honestly, we're not so different. Climate scientists warn us about big changes coming. The data keeps piling up, unstable trends in the very systems we rely on. But like those ancient scribes, we keep measuring and recording and following procedures, not always seeing the bigger picture. We log temperatures, track carbon, count melting glaciers because that's what's expected. But the real weight of what those numbers mean, it hasn't fully sunk in. Maybe these ancient warning systems can snap us out of it. They show us climate chaos isn't new. Cosmic cycles have always shaped what happens here on Earth. Previous civilizations ran into these same transitions, and they either got ready or got wiped out, depending on whether they listened. We've got tools those ancient folks never dreamed of. We know the why behind the patterns they just had to watch. We have models, satellites, data networks, the internet, and the ability to team up across the whole planet. But we face the same basic problem: getting people to care about things that happen on a timeline way longer than any election cycle or human life. The old astronomers solved this with ritual and religion. They made watching the skies a sacred job for priests. It worked, because keeping up a project for centuries takes more than logic. It needs belief and institutions that last. We can't do it their way. We don't have priest astronomers tracking the heavens as a sacred duty, but we can steal a page from their playbook. We can make sure critical knowledge is copied in lots of ways, spread far and wide, and stored in forms that last, even if people forget what it means for a while. That's the genius of depth encoding. When you can't count on anyone understanding your words, your math, or even your culture, you make the message physical. You bury the important stuff deeper, tougher, harder to erase. You create signals that hang on, even when their original meaning is gone. So what's our version of that? How do we warn future people centuries from now, maybe after everything's changed or crumbled? Digital files rot, languages drift, organizations disappear. But some things just have to survive. Cosmic cycles, climate patterns, the knowledge that transitions come and shake everything up. Maybe the answer hasn't changed all that much in 4,000 years. Use every format you can. Spread the message everywhere. Make it physical, etch it in stone, store it in places that last. And most of all, Build institutions that keep collecting data and sharing knowledge, even when the rewards aren't obvious. Because the real payoff only shows up over many lifetimes, long after the original observers are gone. Hear what the tablets really teach. Not just details about planetary cycles, but a kind of meta-knowledge, lessons on how to keep knowledge alive, even when the world falls apart. How do you make sure the right information survives disaster? How do you build warnings that last, even after the people who made them are long gone? If the Anunnaki were real, not gods, but ancient keepers of knowledge, they got it. They set up protocols meant to outlast themselves. They passed down ways of recording and preserving data that could work even if nobody remembered the theory behind them. They baked in redundancy, so even if most of the system broke down, some pieces would survive. And it worked. The knowledge made it through. The warnings stuck around. People kept watching and recording generation after generation for 2,000 years or more. The data piled up. Patterns started to show. Now, finally, we live in a world that's advanced enough to crack their code and maybe wise enough to use what we learn. In the labs, where conservationists scan these ancient tablets, map out every groove and dent, and turn raw clay into digital files, they sometimes pause and think about the chain they're part of. Someone in Babylon pressed a stylus into wet clay. Centuries later, a scribe in Baghdad copied that tablet before it crumbled away. In Victorian London, an archaeologist dug up that copy from the dirt. A curator in America cataloged it in a museum. And now, here in the modern world, someone scans it, studies it, deciphers not just the words but the structure, the hidden information the first scribe tucked away for exactly this purpose. The chain held 4,000 years. Empires rose and fell. Disasters struck, revolutions came and went. Technology changed everything, and still, the information passed from hand to hand. Generation by generation, it waited for someone who could finally understand. That's not a myth. That's the single most successful information preservation system humans have ever built. It survived the death of languages, the collapse of civilizations, the loss of whole bodies of knowledge. It didn't just keep data safe. It preserved notes about how good the data was, ways to judge its reliability, frameworks for keeping warnings alive across centuries. Honestly, it's awe-inspiring. These ancient knowledge keepers, whoever they were, created something far sturdier than their temples, their cities, or even their language. The buildings collapsed, the cities vanished, the empire faded away. But the knowledge stayed. Pressed into clay, baked by time, it waited for a generation that could finally read it. That's us, and the message is urgent. The cycles are repeating. The patterns are lining up. The same conditions that triggered climate shifts in the past are coming back around. We have some time to get ready, but not forever. Those ancient warning systems, built to track the sky, are signaling now that another big transition is on the way. It doesn't mean everything's doomed. It does mean we're heading into rougher waters. Climate patterns that have been stable for ages, the ones that let civilization thrive, could start to wobble. Farms set up for today's weather might need to change. Infrastructure built for the old normal could face new strains. But here's the thing. Knowing all this ahead of time makes a huge difference. We can get ready. We can plan instead of just reacting. We can put resources in place before crisis hits. That's exactly what these warning systems were built for, to give us enough lead time to do something about it. This was the ancient astronomers' goal. Not to stop cosmic cycles, nobody can do that, but to spot them early, to adapt, to fix things before they break, to give civilization a real shot at surviving the upheaval instead of having to piece things back together from scraps. Right now, the tablets matter in a way they haven't for millennia, not because they've changed, but because we're finally facing the conditions they were meant to warn us about. The cycles are finishing. The checkpoints are here, and for the first time, we're actually able to see what's happening. In 2024, Dr. Klein's team dropped a bombshell in the Journal of Archaeological Science, a deep dive into these ancient depth-encoded tablets. They played it safe, as scientists do, but their main point landed hard. The old astronomical protocols weren't just ritual. They held real information about long-term climate cycles. The numbers lined up. The predictions matched what we know from ancient climate records. The warning systems those tablets described actually worked. Word spread quietly, but it spread. Suddenly, climate scientists started poking around in archaeoastronomy journals. Assyriologists and atmospheric physicists found themselves on the same Zoom calls. People started to seriously ask, could these ancient methods help modern climate models? Maybe, just maybe, all that institutional knowledge, passed down for thousands of years, could help us see patterns we still haven't fully figured out. Now those conversations are picking up speed. Grants are getting written. New research teams are forming. The big machinery of science is slowly waking up to the idea that this ancient stuff matters. That maybe what we once brushed off as myth is actually data. Maybe there's a reason these protocols survived for centuries. This flips the script. For ages, we've looked down on the ancients, thought of them as primitive, superstitious, just making up stories to explain what they didn't understand. But this depth-encoded data, it doesn't come from primitive minds. Primitive people don't run statistical analyses or leave confidence levels or build warning systems meant to last thousands of years. Turns out our ancestors weren't clueless. They were survivors. They lived through disasters we can barely picture. They lost knowledge we're only now starting to uncover. They built systems, on purpose, to make sure future generations would know what to look out for, especially when those patterns stretched beyond the reach of living memory. They were people like us. Different world, different tools, but the same goal. Keep knowledge alive, help the future prepare, give the next generation a fighting chance against storms they themselves would never face. Those tablets, that's their message in a bottle to us. 4,000 years on the move. Surviving collapsing empires, dying languages, copy after copy from scribes who sometimes didn't even understand what they were preserving. Sheltered by institutions that outlasted the empires that founded them. All of it, so when the cycles came back around, somebody would notice and be ready. And now that's us. We got the message, we cracked the code, we checked the numbers. The ball in our court. Do we have the sense to actually use this? Will we honor the people who fought to preserve it by listening to what they tried so hard to say? Will we get ready for the changes they saw coming? Or will we ignore it and learn the hard way, like so many before us, that the universe doesn't care whether we believe or not? The decision is ours, but it won't wait forever. Cycles don't pause for human doubts. Patterns finish. The cosmic markers those tablets tracked, they're lining up right now. The transition the ancients warned about, it's starting. In the archives, where those old tablets sit, baked clay holding messages from the past, there's a kind of tension in the air. It feels like everything coming to a head, just as the whole preservation system was designed for. Suddenly, old warnings sound like they're speaking straight to us. The Anunnaki, the teachers, the keepers of knowledge, they're not coming back. They were never gods. They were people, maybe survivors of earlier disasters, who figured out the patterns in the sky and how they played out on Earth. They taught, they built observation systems. They made sure the work would keep going because they knew the day would come when it all mattered. Well, that day's here. The cycles have come around. The knowledge matters. The warnings are right in front of us. The only question left is whether we're actually paying attention. Out in the ruins, the desert wind blows over the place where it all started, where the first cities rose from the mud after the flood, where people rebuilt on top of wreckage, where scribes pressed urgent messages into clay, hoping their warnings would last longer than their world. They were right. The warnings made it. They reached us. 4,000 years later, after disasters, after the fall of worlds, the knowledge is still here. Now it whispers from the archives. You see it in the patterns conservators trace, in the numbers researchers crunch, in the cycles playing out in the sky just like the ancients wrote down. It's time, not for gods, not for lost teachers, but for the return of the conditions they tried to warn us about. The cycle turns, ages shift. Now we find out if we learned enough to recognize what's happening and if we're ready to do something about it. The tablets carried the knowledge. Ancient astronomers kept up the records. Scribes copied out the warnings. Conservators cracked the codes. Researchers checked the math. The chain never broke. The knowledge reached us whole. Now it's our turn to see if that's enough. Does knowing ahead of time change anything? Do warnings matter if no one listens, or do they only matter when someone does? This is our test, right here, right now. The moment those ancient warning systems were meant for has finally arrived. The clay kept faith for thousands of years. It remembers. It warns. It waits to see if we're worth all that waiting. The cycles are moving. The patterns are obvious. If we're ever going to act, it's now. Picture this. Somewhere tonight, tucked in a museum archive in Philadelphia, Chicago, or New Haven, a clay tablet lies in its padded box. Its surface still bears the marks pressed by a reed stylus 4,000 years ago. If you could hold it, if you were allowed, if you pressed your thumb where an ancient scribe once did, you'd feel the link. You'd feel the touch of hands separated by millennia, but joined by the same need to save what matters. That scribe believed their words would last, outlast them, outlast their city, maybe even their world, make it to someone who'd need it, someone facing the return of patterns that run deeper than memory, someone who'd need a warning and the hard-won wisdom of generations who kept watch even when it seemed pointless. That scribe was right. The tablet survived, the message lasted, the warning got here. In those quiet pre-dawn hours, when sleep is thin and the line between past and present blurs, you can almost feel them. Not so much voices, but a presence. The weight of all those watchers, all those years. Astronomers scaling ziggurats at midnight to watch the planets. Scribes copying tablets by lamplight, saving words they didn't fully understand but knew mattered. Conservators hiding archives through wars and chaos. Researchers sticking to their protocols as empires crashed down. Every one of them a link in the chain. All of them holding on to their part, trusting that someday someone would need what they kept safe, that the knowledge would matter, that the warnings would be heard. We're the someday they hoped for. We're the ones who need what they saved. The knowledge means more now than it has in thousands of years. The warnings aren't just ancient, they're ours. The patterns they tracked are closing their loops right above us. The chain held. Through disaster, through the loss of language, the fall of cities, the forgetting of why any of this mattered, the essential knowledge survived, pressed into clay, hidden in patterns, locked away in archives, waiting. But the waiting over. We have the knowledge, we've cracked the warnings, we've checked the patterns. We know what those long ago astronomers were tracking and why they thought it mattered so much. Now we face the same choice every generation gets. Do we honor the past by learning, or do we ignore it and stumble through the same mistakes again? The tablets can't make us listen. They just do what they were made to do, carry the message and hope that when the moment comes, someone's smart enough to decode it and brave enough to act. That part's on us. The knowledge made it. The warnings are right there. The patterns are plain. The rest, that's our responsibility. In the dark of the archive, the tablet waits. Silent, patient, job done. It kept what it needed to keep. It reached who it needed to reach. The warning is delivered. The clay never gave up. 4,000 years, storms, fires, floods, whole civilizations forgetting, and still it held on. It kept the pattern alive. It carried the signal, stubbornly refusing to let the knowledge vanish. Now it's our shot to do the same. To honor the scribes who carved the words, the watchers who paid attention, the teachers who set the rules. All those generations who guarded what they knew because they believed, deep down, it would matter someday. They believed in us. They trusted we'd be clever enough to crack their codes, wise enough to listen, humble enough to learn, brave enough to act. The wheel turns again. The knowledge stands in front of us plain as day. The warning is here. The desert wind keeps blowing like it always does, sweeping dust across the bones of cities that rose, crumbled, and rose again. That dust holds memories, pressed into clay by people who watched, recorded, saved what mattered. And the wind carries their voices, thin but urgent, echoing the same demand. Pay attention. Look for the signs. Don't miss the pattern. Get ready. It's coming back. We're out of time. The message is loud and clear. The choice is right here. And somewhere in the dark just before morning, a clay tablet waits on its shelf. Its job's done. Its words delivered. Its promise kept all these ages. Now it waits, just to see if we were worth the wait.